your interpretation of the word honesty and my interpretation probably super similar, and so if we both strive to be honest, it'll work. But it's also in this sort of fantasy world stuff that we have. It sort of reminds you of like a knightly code of behavior. Besides just, but it's one that the common man can also pursue. But it's also something I love about the structure of it. That to me, it's sort of like on the level of like the three laws of robotics. How it's just sort of like a simple, understandable, universal quality to it that people can sort of grab. And
there was an interesting inspiration that I don't tell this story very often. It's trickier to hold in a group, but I'm gonna ask the people on video here to participate in the following story. I'm gonna tell a very short story that involves 5 characters, and what each of you are gonna have to do, the other 5 of you on the video call, is you have to tell me who is the most despicable person in this story. Who's the worst? No, I'm not in the story. I'm telling the story. Okay, so here's the story. And by the way, my oldest brother Randy told me this story. And you know the tarot cards in the beginning of Ultima 4, you have to do these virtue tests where you start with 8 virtues, you do 4 questions, then 2 questions, and 1 more question, and that structures your virtues through your character. But this is the story that inspired that. And my version of the story is using the characters Popeye, Olive Oil, Brutus, Sweet Pea, and Wimpy. Okay, so in this story, there's a river that separates where Popeye lives and Olive Oil lives, but they love each other dearly and they really want to get together, but there's a raging, deadly river between them, so they can't reach each other. And so Olive Oil, who really wants to get over the river and see Popeye, goes to the first person she can think of on her side of the river with a boat, and that's Brutus, and says, Brutus, I love Popeye. Popeye loves me. I need to get across the river. Will you take me across in your boat? And Brutus says, sure, I'll take you across my boat, but you have to sleep with me first. And so Olive Oil goes, no, thank you. No, thanks. I'm not going to do that. So she goes to the only other person on this side of the river with a boat, and that's Wimpy. And Wimpy, I'm in love with Popeye. Popeye loves me. I want to get across. Ask Brutus, but he demands that I sleep with him before he'll take me across. Please, I hope you will take me across the river. And Wimpy goes, no. I'm not going to get involved. This is not my problem. I'm sorry. I'm not going to help. So now I was going like, well, shoot, what do I do? Those are the only 2 people on my side of the river with a boat. So you're like, well, I really want to see Popeye, so I'm going to give in to Brutus. So she does. She goes and she sleeps with Brutus. Then Brutus, being a man of his word, he takes her across the river and delivers her to Popeye's side of the river. So Olive Oil goes to see Popeye and says, Popeye, my love, I finally made it over here to see you. By the way, I have to tell you what I had to do here. Brutus demanded, and I eventually gave in to sleeping with him before I could come across here to see you. And Popeye goes, oh, you shameless hussy. I never want to see you again. I no longer love you. We're done. And so Olive Oil is, of course, crushed. And she goes, she's just super sad. She goes to see the only other person in the story. She goes to see Sweet Pea, and she tells Sweet Pea this story. And Sweet Pea goes, Popeye is such an asshole. I'm going to go beat him up. And so Sweet Pea goes and beats up Popeye.
Classic Sweet Pea.
Okay, that is the whole story. So the question for you, starting with Vesper, who is the worst person in the story? Who did the worst thing in the story?
Wimpy in action.
In action for Wimpy. Okay, Allium?
Olive Oil. She did whatever she needed to get what she wanted without deciding whether or not the price was worth it.
So you think Olive Oil was the worst? Is that what you're saying? Mm-hmm. Okay. And Keith?
I agree that Olive Oil was the one she...
And Justin?
I'm with Allie for sure.
And Stephen?
I think Brutus for putting her in that position.
Okay. So what's interesting about this, and if I went around and asked you who you thought was, by the way, Olive Oil is usually seen as the worst, especially by women, and statistically, as I asked this question. But it's fascinating to see how different people, like some people who go, yeah, Wimpy's the only guy, Sweet Pea is the only person who did something good by going to beating up Popeye. He took action and defeated a bad guy, so to speak. And so they actually like that's a positive for some people. But and a lot of people, some people are really against Brutus. because of what he demanded. Others have said things like, look, he put a price out there. He was very clear about what he wanted. He took her across. Olive Oil could have found some other way. He just was very clear about his objectives, and and so there's nothing morally wrong with that. And so it's fascinating that even that little simple story splits so many people into having pretty strongly, it's fascinating to see people's moral compasses get exposed by the answer to that question. And so I went and I said, okay, well, that's what set me off on finding these small ethical parable comparisons that I could then create stories around to bifurcate, activity and challenges within the game.
You could
But you
also
need. Sorry. Go ahead.
You could also accuse Popeye of inaction. I mean, while Olive Oil was running around trying anything she could to get across the river, what was he doing?
Yeah, and we don't know. So, but the point is, there's no more to the story than that. But it's it's a fair.
But his feelings are his
analysis.
feelings, I would say. So he's allowed to feel however he wants. So that Sweet Pea for me is the number 2 bad guy because he is trying to deny Popeye the feelings that he had.
Yeah.
The violence.
But it's fascinating.
Trying to argue with him. It's a good story. I like it.
Yeah, but those are really sort of the foundations of real Ultima, starting with Ultima 4.
And then you also didn't just sort of have like a sort of lip service philosophy system. You sort of started coding in stuff to make sure that you can do honest things. You can do dishonest things.
Well, in fact, I very specifically I set traps. Because I knew people would be trying to min-max and take advantage. Yeah. So I purposely put places you could take advantage of the game in the game.
Yeah.
But I put traps into it where the game would know you were cheating or lying or stealing, and it wouldn't try to stop you, and it wouldn't tell you you've made the wrong choice at that moment.
Yeah.
It would let you sort of build up a street cred of behavior. Of basically, I ran karma meters in all those different categories.
Yeah.
Never exposing to you how the karma was raised or lowered. Because what I quickly noticed, even as I was writing the game, is if people believe they're being judged, they pay attention to what they're doing, even if they're not actually being judged. And so what I mean by that is like, it's really hard to know if someone's being brave versus stupid. Or are they running away because they're a coward, or because they really will die? Or
even are they bored and just sort of like doing any dumb old thing?
Correct.
So I'm about to log out from that. Let me just do something stupid.
Exactly. And so those are very hard to actually test well. So what's important about it is to make you believe it's being tested, because that way what you'll do is you'll think about it before you just go kill things or abandon. Like if you were running by and you saw some orcs eating a child, then you might go, wow, if I just run by, I might be dinged for being a coward, and so I'd better go face them. But if it's a dragon, then do I face it? Or if I don't, am I going to be seen as a coward? Or is discretion the better part of valor? And so the point is you make people think about it. And so that was really the goal. The goal wasn't to make a statement that one is or isn't the right virtuous thing to do.
Yeah.
The point was to make you think about, I'm trying to be the good guy here. I'm trying to actually be helpful. I'm trying to demonstrate virtue. How can I best do that?
Yeah, it's good hooks for designers, I think, too. It's sort of anything that sort of helps give direction. That's not just sort of like anything goes is great for any story.
Yeah.
And from a game designer and mechanics standpoint,
and
it sort of helps you focus on the things that are most interesting for the
and for those who didn't live through it, Ultima 4 was very black and white, right? All the you once you sort of learned you're being managed and monitored, then as long as you mind your P's and Q's and you always do the virtuous thing and avoid the things that are clearly bad, unvirtuous, you could get through and get your meters all up. So for Ultima 5, I wanted to make sure I wanted to become more sophisticated in the way I told the tale. And I said, there are people in the real world like I will argue most television evangelists, my personal opinion of most television evangelists is they're here to make money. And I have personal doubt about the authenticity of many of them as to the purpose of their espousing of virtues and the way they use virtue to enrich themselves or for other forms of power. And because I think that the real world is full of that. Now, that's not just in TV evangelists. I would argue we have a lot of politicians who are that way too. So the real world is full of nuances that go beyond simple good and evil. And so what I started doing after Ultima 4 is I started doing things like having characters that would say, hey, I'm here to help. And they would appear to be doing all they could to help, but are really just passing on your details to the bad guys the whole time. Or there's a bad guy who, grew up on the streets and steals food and money because that's all he's ever known, but they really have a heart of gold. And so in the end, when push comes to shove and it's important to make the right call, they're really the ally you're going to need at the very end, if you know what I mean. And so I try to add a lot more of that subtlety. And I also tried to add in things where, like, the bad guys, instead of just waiting around for you to kill them, that the bad guys should be trying to not only catch you, but catch anybody helping you. Yeah. And so I started doing things like, if you would go convince a townsperson to spy for you or to give you information or to help you, I would find a point in the story where anybody that was helping you would be killed by the bad guy. And that way you would, first of all, feel guilty that you've somehow managed to get this person killed, but also, really start now thinking even harder about, wow, how do you navigate a world that has this level of danger? And it makes you really think the bad guys are now just not waiting for you at the end. They're actually doing bad things, making them worthy of you considering them the bad guy. And so I tried to really deepen in all these directions simultaneously. But that was all in the solo player games. It was all really before we went online, where this is a lot harder to do in an online setting like we're all in right now.
Especially when sometimes we can have like solo areas that sort of change if you come back, depending upon the actions you did the first time you were through. But if we have like a big open area that anyone can walk in and out, we're limited as to how much change, visible change we can have.
Yep.
In the episode 2 stuff, I'm trying to sort of fiddle with that a little bit. So like if you go into Port Harmony, there's two different things that can change a little bit. There's some flowers that appear in planters if you have hit a certain number of quests. So the place is beautifying itself because you are participating in the area. And then eventually, when I have like a main storyline in, when you hit a certain main storyline milestone, then these sort of like virtue banners will start to appear around the city to show that there's a different level of achievement going on. But the problem is I can't make it critical to mention that as part of the storyline. It just sort of has to happen because it's going to be quest flag triggered. So if you have done all the great things and I haven't, and we both go into town, all these things are going to pop up because you or people like you have triggered it because of your quest flags. But then if you leave after a little bit, it'll sort of downgrade so that I see the less advanced version of the town. So there's little things like that that'll change. And there'll be like newspapers that when you pick it up, if you're early in the storyline, it'll be the early version of the newspaper. Later on, it'll sort of mention that you've done this great deed. Like, the avatars, routed the bad guys at the battle of whatever, that kind of thing. So I want the world to feel like it's changed, but I have to be careful about how much is displayed. So
yep, I agree.
Sometimes it can get a bit tricky, though. For instance, the first time that Allie ran through Artifice, she got to the cage with all the trapped children and the floor plate in front of it that would trigger
Spoiler.
Yes. And I noticed the floor plate, and I figured, oh, that's clever. If you're a bad guy with your hands full of squirming child, you don't have a hand free to open the door, so they put that floor plate there that will open the door. Let me just step onto it and go through.
So do you know the history of this room?
No.
The room has been changed, by the way. I changed the room a little bit.
But let me tell you the history of this.
Yeah.
This also goes back to Ultima 4. So I already mentioned how in Ultima 4, what was important, I put in as many virtue tests as I could, but I also put in the illusion of a test because as far as the player knew, it was a test, and that was good enough to make them think, because the whole point was to make you think. And so in the final room, the final dungeon that had a series of rooms, there's actually no test. This whole dungeon, in fact, no dungeon room in Ultima 4 had any test in it that I can think of. And but what we did is, you're designing things that you're hoping people will, in their mind's eye, think of as a test. Like I made one room where I knew that by the time you came here, you would have one party member of each player type of character type. So you'd have one fighter, one cleric, one mage, one paladin, one ranger, one shepherd, whatever. And so what I put on the other side of the room was basically a doppelganger group. You put in one fighter, one mage, one whatever else. And so when the room started, I knew, or I hoped, the player they're really just monsters. As far as I was concerned, they were literally just monsters. The code only knew they were monsters. But I thought that the player would at least pause and go like, do I kill them? Do I not? What's the morally right thing to do here? But I just went on and made the next room. I didn't really care what they thought. I just moved on. And so I put one room late in that dungeon in Ultima 4. I put a room where there were cages in the corners of the room with children in it. And in the very center of the room was a lever. And you could walk in or out of the room, out of the north, south, east, or west, without any obstruction. But I knew that a lot of players would come in and go like, oh, the poor children, I better pull the lever and maybe release them. But when you pull the lever, it does release them. But in fact, they were monsters. There was no ability for you to put any NPCs in a dungeon room in Ultima 4. Anything that was alive in those rooms was a monster. And so as soon as you pull the lever, the monsters start attacking you. The children start attacking you from all sides. So they're surrounding you. And so I knew at that point it would be very hard for you to run out of the room because you'd be surrounded. And I thought, ha, 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 I've now created a new moral dilemma for the player because I have no idea really how they'll get out of this room. But it didn't really matter because those are monsters. And so they went on to make the next room, the next room, the next room. So the game is in QA just before release. And one of our QA testers writes a letter to my brother, Robert, who's the president of the company. And he comes to me and he shows me this letter and goes, Richard, what is up with Ultima 4? We have to fix this. And the letter basically said, I refuse to work for a company that so clearly supports child abuse. And Robert comes to me and goes like, Richard, what the hell did you put in the game? And I'm going like, I have no idea what this guy is talking about. I really have no idea. So we'll have to go talk to the player, the QA person. So we go talk to the QA person, and he says it's that room, the room where you pull the lever and the monsters that look like children swarm around you. And because you had to kill them in his mind's eye, he thought that was child abuse. And my brother says, Richard, you have to take it out of the game or we are not publishing it. And I'm going like, screw you, brother Robert, and rest of company. I said, that is the best endorsement I've ever heard for a design. First of all, you don't have to kill them because you could first don't pull the lever. Second, you could put them to sleep and then walk out. Third, you could charm them. They would walk away. You could walk out. Third, you could put down your weapon, punch them with your open hand. As soon as they go below half hit points, they will run away and then you can escape the room. Or they're freaking monsters, kill them and leave the room. And so I'm going, but the fact that it provoked that level of emotional response told me it was a success. And my brother said, I'm not going to publish the game if you leave it in. The risks of their company being seen so poorly is too high. They must be removed. And I'm going like, screw you, I'm not removing them. And then he got my parents involved. And my parents, who are original investors. And so my dad always took my brother's side. My mom used to take always my side, except on this subject. My mom even came out against me. And she was like, Richard, it's just not worth it. It's only one room. You don't want good housekeeping to come out against you and decry your game and all this kind of stuff. And I'm going like, you are all wrong. You can choose to publish it or not, but it is staying in the game. And in the end, they had no choice but to let it go in the game, and it went out. and no one ever complained about it. So no one complained. No one even talked about it. But
No one even
starting with-
suggested like give him like yellow eyes or something inhuman.
no, well,
to
there
make
was that's an Apple II, dude. There's no yellow eyes.
Oh, yeah,
It's black and white. So
and they were like this tiny.
so the what was funny, so starting with like the next game and the next game and the next game and the next game, every game I've done since
Yeah.
has had the room of homage to killing children.
Yep.
And it almost always involves you doing something that inadvertently creates a circumstance where children will die.
Mhm.
And while nobody noticed it in Ultima 4, over years people began to notice it and going like, what the hell is up with Lord British? Because he always has these places where the player is having to slaughter children in order to get through the game. And in all the cases, you don't have to. It's just, but you might as well. They're monsters. They're children of the corn. They're monsters. So you might as well kill them. But
Yeah, we have
but
that-
that's where it comes from.
We have that problem now with herding encounters. Get a road encounter and it's filled with cows and a few dogs watching them. And
yeah.
if you get too close to the dogs, they will attack you. But they're really slow moving. You can just root the dog or outrun it. Or
Right.
so we have people complaining about herding encounters where they have to kill the dogs. It's like, no, you don't have to kill the dog.
Yeah. But anyway, that's where it comes from. So so yes, I hope forever there will always be the room of killing children.
So one thing I changed about that, I don't know if it's like a year ago or more, was what I didn't like was that you didn't see it coming. A lot of people just sort of accidentally kill them like all the time. Like most of the people accidentally kill them because they would step on this secret pressure plate. So I wanted them to see it coming. I wanted them to make that choice because I thought it took away from it for it to be accidental. So I took away the pressure plate trap gimmick, and now you have a choice of how to get through it. The killing thing is still in there if you sort of want to be sloppy and rush through it and care.
No, and Crafty Method, by the way, pointed out the kink room was more disturbing. So because and again, this was the theory for that. So the theory for that was, now that most of us are adult, we're not children anymore, because I wanted to point out, the hypocrisy of attitudes towards S&M, for lack of a better word, but in that how much is too much, how far is too far. And so we built a series of rooms that progressively pushed the envelope from body, S&M bodiness to actual violence, and then whether that violence was perpetrated on a male or on a female. And the whole point of it was to just put it out there in front of you. It was not to make any statement, and it was just to force you to face it. And that's what I did with a lot of later Ultimas too. They were really meant to just put up the provocation of just going, what do you do if? In fact, Ultima 8, the much maligned Ultima 8, was largely a story where in that game you actually would perform rituals by putting like candles on the literal corners of a pentagram and literally standing in the center and chanting demonic names and other things, which immediately offended a lot of employees. I actually had employees quit versus work with me on putting a game in that had symbology that they found offensive.
Yeah.
But in my case, I'm here to point out the fact that all of this is modern tropes that people bring with them. I mean, most of you probably know the history of the pentagram. A lot of Catholic cathedrals have pentagrams all over it. It was the symbol of the Knights Templar, and it was and it was a symbol, by the way, of somewhere around here I have these phi calipers that show in fact, my son's middle name is Phi, 1.61803330 blah blah blah. Is the golden ratio. I don't have my calipers here in reach, but the pentagram manifests this ratio that shows up in all of nature and all of aesthetics and all this other kind of stuff. And so it was seen up until a few hundred years ago as a divine shape and proportion that showed how God's perfect proportions manifested in all this geometry in the world around them. And it was only when the church wanted to take the money, steal the money back from the Knights Templar, that they vilified it and made it into the sign of evil now for all scary movies and all TV evangelists, for lack of a better term. And so I felt it was a good symbol to bring back to showcase, just like I did with Gargoyles and Ultima 6, just like I did with other things where people are trained to believe that if it's red and leathery, has fangs and claws, it must be evil. And so I'm basically showing everyone they can be bigoted, showing everybody they can be racist, so everybody they can have all these closely held beliefs that have no basis in rationale other than how they were raised, and to try to get them to rethink their stance on a wide variety of these otherwise potentially closely held beliefs. So anyway, that was the intent, and you can judge for yourself how it went.
Nice. I love hearing this kind of backstory.
All right, we are getting ready to run prizing again.
Let's do that, and then let's go play.
Yes, exactly. Get that going. So I'm just giving folks a chance to get off their last efforts at Happy Birthday, Lord British.
I'm going to go grab myself another beverage. I'll be right back online too. Hang on. Be right back.
Okay. In fact, I think fix my microphone.
By the way, I am still in Castellatos, as are the other devs, including Lord British. I am still giving away Lord British 62 shield items for those players who want it. I'm off to one side of the stage, the steps, and currently I'm juggling these Oracle Eyes if you want to look for me.
All right, it's not working. You guys still hear me?
I hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to give up. So sadly, the webcam has taken over my microphone. I was trying to switch it over to my headset, but when I do that, then I stop hearing everybody else. So just a big mess. All right, one more minute, and then we're going to run the prizing.
Vesper, I hear you broadcasting something.
Sorry.
It's okay. So how many prizes are we giving at this time? 2 sets?
Yep.
Nice.
While Steven's doing that, I got a big kick out of, you guys were showing your challenge coins earlier, and I got this one when I was in the office, and I did not even realize it was rare until Richard told me it was a rare coin.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
I don't have one. I have all the other ones. Or do I?
Oh yeah.
Nice. That is a very nice one.
That is very rare, by the way. It's not just slightly rare, but I've only seen like 4 in my life.
How many wedding challenge coins are there? I know Scotty has one.
I have one right here. So there's mine.
Oh, geez, Keith! Wow.
Don't spend them all in one place.
I have lots from Shroud, but when I brought this one out, Richard was like, "Oh my God, that is super rare." I had no idea it was even rare.
Yeah.
Okay, we got the.
I think I flicked that one out when we were at Dragon Con one year as my coin that was rolling around in my purse. It no longer rolls around in my purse, by the way.
So have any of you on voice here with us, or on? I can see the feeds too. I'm curious. Ethan Hawke wrote a book called Rules for a Knight, and it's actually quite good. It's a little, small format, hardbound book, or at least hardbound. One time I bought it, might be a paperback now too. And they're little stories, they're little parables, and they're all about virtues basically. And it's not my virtues, and but they're all just chivalric honor things, but told in a relatively modern way and told very succinctly. And anyway, I think they're quite nice. but it made me think about, maybe I should at some point work on a, Lord British's virtues kind of home to really kind of enumerate what might, ultimately become ethical parables like that are used as a basis of quests sometime for the future, but also